It's Christmas Day in 1944. The war in Europe has been waged for over 5 years now, the war in the Pacific 3, while the great powers duke it out in the Ardennes and in the Pacific. In the Chaobang province of French Indochina, Vo Nguyen Giap looks through the forest at a small French outpost at Phi Cat. Behind him is 34 men and women of the Chow Hung Dao Armed Propaganda Brigade, armed with decades-old weapons. Dressed in French uniforms, they march into the outpost and murder the commander. Soon after, the outpost surrenders. This process is repeated the next day at the outpost at Nan'an. Capturing dozens of firearms and thousands of dollars worth of money with no casualties taken, Vo has achieved his first military victory. It will not be his last. Little does he know, in the next 35 years, he will go on to face the armies of the Japanese, French, Americans, and Chinese, and come out victorious every time. By his death at 102 years old, he would be considered one of the most successful generals of the 20th century. Giap was born to relatively well-off peasant parents in the Quang Binh province of Vietnam in either 1911 or 1912. However, his father and sister would be in prison when he was young, and both would end up dying as a result. After his father died, he would attend school, where he turned out to be an excellent student, eventually making his way into a prestigious French-run lycée in the city of Hue. This school was attended by many future leaders of Vietnam, including Ngo Dinh Diem and Ho Chi Minh, who will become important later in the story. Unfortunately, when he was 15, he was expelled from school for protesting against the government. During this period, he would first be exposed to communist ideology while at home. Eventually, he would return to Hue, where he continued protesting and ended up going to prison for it a few years later. In 1931, he would officially join the Communist Party of Vietnam. He would attend college from 1933 to 1938, majoring in political economy. Soon after, he would marry the daughter of a professor he was close with, and they would have one child in 1939. Around this time, Giap would also become a history teacher at a local school, since he could not become a lawyer. During his tenure as a history teacher, he was deeply interested in military strategy and read many classical texts on the subject, such as The Art of War and On War by Clausewitz. When the Communist Party he was a part of was banned due to the French government having fears of world communism following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Vo was forced to relocate to China. This would turn out to be helpful for his future endeavors, as he got real-world experience fighting the Japanese alongside the CCP during the Second Sino-Japanese War. This experience would help him build his doctrine for fighting the French and later Americans in guerrilla and revolutionary conflicts. A year after his exile to China, he covertly returned to Indochina, which by then had been taken over by the Japanese, albeit with Vichy presence still existing and functioning as prior. There, he attempted to rally support for the newly founded Viet Minh, which was seeking to achieve national independence for Vietnam. For the next 3 years, Giap would build support for the Viet Minh within Vietnam. He convinced many local villagers to rally to his cause, forming a strong base for the Viet Minh in certain areas of North Vietnam. Then, in late 1944, the party ordered him to carry out his first military attack. Forming the Chung Hung Dao Brigade, which in reality numbered only a platoon, they attacked two outposts at Phi Cat and Nha Nan. This would be Giap's first military victory, and it went very well for him. Taking no casualties, he managed to obtain a decent amount of weapons, some cash, and importantly also gained many defectors from the colonial garrisons which the French had used to guard their outposts. With the situation in the Pacific rapidly deteriorating for the Japanese by 1945, the Viet Minh grew multiple times its size and became more emboldened. American commanders in the region supported their efforts and would send Major Archimedes Patty, an OSS operative, to Indochina to help train Vo and his guerrillas. With this support, they grew even stronger. Ironically enough, many of the men Patty had helped to train would fight his later successors in the 1960s and 1970s. With the Japanese gone, Vo and Ho Chi Minh attempted to establish an independent republic. Unfortunately, the great powers had other ideas, as they agreed during the Potsdam Conference to back the French in their bid to retake Indochina. After negotiations at Dalat and Fontainebleau failed to resolve this issue, the Vietnamese government declared war on France in December of 1946. Thus would begin the First Indochina War. During the conflict, the French would rapidly capture the cities, but the Viet Minh controlled the countryside and especially the mountains. Early French operations failed to capture senior Viet Minh leaders in the Viet Bach campaign. Reeling from the failure, the French would attempt to set up a puppet government known as the State of Vietnam, led by former Emperor Bao Dai, who had similarly led a Japanese puppet state earlier. In order to gain international support and legitimacy, similar deals would be cut with Cambodia and Laos. The guerrilla struggle of the Viet Minh would be helped significantly by the end of the Chinese Civil War in late 1949, with the CCP providing their communist allies in Vietnam large amounts of materiel. On the other hand, French forces could not scale at similar rates, as France did not send troops from the mainland to fight in Indochina, only ones from the Foreign Legion and the colonial troops, which included some former SS men. Thus, the Viet Minh gained the initiative in the conflict. Luckily for the French, they eventually gained some American support, as the recognition of the Viet Minh by communist powers turned the Indochina War into yet another proxy conflict. Despite the support, by mid-1950 the Viet Minh had controlled most of Vietnam, except for the cities along the coast, which the French stubbornly defended. By the end of the year, the Viet Minh had made significant gains in the far north, pushing the French entirely out. Faced with these gains, the French decided to fortify the Red River Delta. Undeterred, Giap attempted to end the war quickly by attacking entrenched forces. Throughout the first half of 1951, Giap lost almost 20,000 men in 3 attacks with very few gains, and the French defense held strong. This would be a major blow to Giap, as the French had seemingly regained the initiative. However, this would not be to last, as the French population had gotten tired of foreign wars. From then until 1954, the war would mostly be one of attrition, with the Viet Minh having a slight advantage. Each time the French forces advanced, they would be beaten back by Giap's forces, who slowly took over territory. However, by mid-1953, the Viet Minh had gained the upper hand in Laos, and the French situation continued to deteriorate. Henry Navarre was brought in mid-1953 to lead French troops. He had long realized that military victory was impossible, and thus he wanted to fortify key installations in order to continue the stalemate and force the Viet Minh to a political negotiation. To that end, the French decided to take the town of Dien Bien Phu, which was a key passageway from Vietnam to Laos. By March of 1954, the French garrison numbered 15,000. Seeing this, Giap also prepared to take the town, sending more than twice that amount into the area surrounding the valley. In addition, he also managed to move artillery pieces through the dense jungle, which many thought had been impossible, which would help to secure his victory. In the ensuing battle, the French airfields would be rapidly destroyed by the artillery, and with weather making it difficult for parachute drops, the French became starved. Attempting to hold out until negotiations would open in late April, the French desperately defended their position, while Giap dug tunnels and trenches ever closer to their position. On May 6th, the Viet Minh would overrun French positions, and a ceasefire was declared. 10,000 French troops would be captured. This would be the last major battle of the war, and the Geneva Accords of 1954 would see a ceasefire in August. Thus, the French would pull out of Vietnam, and Giap and Ho Chi Minh would be free to create their own government, at least in the north. After the war, he returned to his post as a senior government official in North Vietnam. During this time, he remained head of the armed forces and oversaw the transition into a standing army. During this time, he also used the armed forces to forcibly collectivize many farms and implement communist policies, which he admitted resulted in many deaths. He also organized many guerrilla operations into South Vietnam, which aimed to destabilize the South in preparation for a northern takeover. When the Americans decided to intervene in Vietnam to help South Vietnam, Giap once again found himself fighting against a Western power. He used the same tactics which had proved him well in the previous conflict. Instead of confronting the Americans in set-piece battle, Giap used guerrilla warfare and infiltrations into the South in order to wear down American morale. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, which he had set up during the interwar years, was a key part of this, as it provided the necessary supplies for the Viet Cong fighters of the South to do their operations. Giap was also a planner of the Tet Offensive, which exemplifies his ideology, as despite capturing very few cities and taking heavy casualties, the Tet Offensive managed to weaken American morale significantly, and the war became more unpopular at home. Thus, this would eventually lead to the U.S. withdrawal. His other major achievement during the war was in 1972, when he planned and executed the Easter Offensive, a departure from his previous guerrilla warfare tactics, as it was a conventional armored assault. However, the attack was stalled, albeit with very high casualties. Still, it played into his grander plans, as he was trying to negotiate a better position during the Paris Peace Accords. The Americans, attempting to do the same, were conducting large-scale bombing raids at around the same time. Eventually, North Vietnam and the U.S. got some concessions in the Accords at the expense of the South Vietnamese, and the Paris Peace Accords were signed in early 1973. With the American withdrawal, the North Vietnamese were easily able to gain the initiative in conventional fighting, where they were at least evenly matched with their adversaries, thus they would take Saigon by 1975. However, due to his failure during the Easter Offensive, he had been replaced as the commander of the North Vietnamese army, and thus did not get credit for the capture of Saigon. Still, he was made deputy prime minister when a new unified Vietnam emerged in 1976. His military career would continue when he successfully removed the Khmer Rouge from Cambodia in 1978, ending the brutal Cambodian genocide, which had been occurring for 3 years by that point. Since Cambodia and China were allies, the Chinese decided to invade northern Vietnam soon after. However, Giap managed to stabilize the situation and prevent the Chinese from taking any territory. The war ended within 4 weeks, with no change in territory. The Sino-Vietnamese conflict would be his last, as he retired soon after from his military position. In his retirement, Giap became a prominent author, writing several books about his ideology and military strategies, which have become quite popular in certain circles. He gave a few interviews to the press, including one where he met with Robert McNamara. He would die at the age of 102 in 2013. Zap's post-war legacy has been hotly debated. While he was no doubt a competent commander, achieving victory in many battles and winning every war he was involved with, his moniker as one of the greatest generals of history is contested by many of those whom he fought against. For example, American commanders often point to his willingness to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of troops in order to secure victory. For example, at the famed Battle of Dien Bien Phu, he took 3 to 4 times as many casualties as his French adversaries. During the Vietnam War, he also lost several hundred thousand troops to the Americans, who suffered less than 70,000 killed in action. However, his defenders present that not only did he fight with drastically fewer resources and a lack of advanced technology, he managed to keep his army functioning despite his high losses, and as long as his army survived, he would continue the struggle and slowly drain American morale and willingness to stay, and embolden the people of Vietnam to join his cause. This was another one of his strategies that his supporters praised, using a holistic approach of social, economic, political, and military tactics to force his enemies to concede, whereas the US and France were much more focused on pure military victories. His ability to use both guerrilla and conventional warfare in tandem in situations where they were most effective was also be praised. All of this is made more impressive by the fact that he was never a professionally trained soldier. Still, no matter how he is thought of, it is indisputable that the modern state of Vietnam owes much of its founding and successes to Vo Nguyen Giap, and thus he is highly celebrated in that nation.